Okay, it is time for our Chapter 7 conclusion notes. So we've done part one and part two. Part one was basically demand notes, and part two was supply notes. So this is our last part three of our Chapter 7 notes for economics, putting supply and demand together. Move that guy. So not too many notes actually for this last part of Chapter 7, but where it all really, comes together, as I guess I've said. So hopefully we can picture a demand curve in our heads. If I just said, think about a demand graph, a demand curve, what would that look like? And hopefully you're thinking about a downward sloping line from left to right. Then if I said, hey, a supply curve, what does that look like? An upward curving line from. And so if you think of those two together, right, that should be an X. Yeah. So I have demand going down, supply going up, and they come together and make an X. And that point where they meet is a very important point called equilibrium. So the equilibrium price, I like that guy better. Equilibrium price is that point where supply meets demand. And it's really two things. It's not just equilibrium price, it is an equilibrium point because it tells us not just price, but it should tell us two variables, of course, right? It also tells us quantity. So we only have two variables. Y-axis is always, always price. X-axis is always, always quantity. And where those 2 points meet, any plot point will tell me both price and quantity. And where they meet is the equilibrium point. Okay, so when those lines shift, we've talked about that, demand shifts or supply shifts based on determinants of demand or determinants of supply. When those curves shift, then that plot point, that point where supply and demand curves cross each other, and if one shifts this way, well, now I have a new point right there where they meet, right? Um, that gives me a new equilibrium point, which will give me both a new price and a new quantity. So gets a little theoretical. Hopefully when we look at a graph, it'll make more sense. But in a market, in a capitalist system, that equilibrium price is supposed to be that sort of almost magical price where the exact number of demanders, consumers, people are willing to buy lemonade at that price matches the exact same number of people who want to sell lemonade at that price. So if you raise the price some, right, suppliers should be happy. Oh, I think I'll get more for lemonade, I'll make more. But all of a sudden you realize, oh, people aren't buying as much lemonade. Demanders are unhappy because price is too high. So no one sits down and says, this is the market and this is equilibrium price. Equilibrium price is discovered by a million individual actions of suppliers offering goods for sale at different prices, demanders buying those goods or services at different prices. And if you have goods left over, like let's say you've made too many cups of lemonade, that's called a surplus. Supply is greater than demand. That's a surplus. Or the opposite of that is you run out of stuff and people still want to buy it at that price. So that's called a shortage when demand is greater than supply, right? So let's say I'm sitting at the end of my driveway. I'm trying to sell $10 cup lemonade. I'm like, ooh, $10 a cup. I'll work really hard making lemonade for $10. Go down to the end of my driveway. Only my mom came by and bought it. So I have 9 cups of lemonade left. No one will buy it. They drive by and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's too expensive. What am I likely to do? Lower the price of my lemonade, right? And maybe I get all the way down to $2 for a cup of lemonade and I sell it like that. And I have people driving by and saying, where's that lemonade? Where's that lemonade? I wanted to buy it. But for only $2 a glass, I'm not going to work that hard to make that many anyway. I only want to work maybe an hour, whatever. So anyway, that would be a shortage. But I realized, man, there's a real demand for lemonade in this town. Maybe I'll raise my price to $3 and see what happens. Maybe one person drops out of that supply, right? But I still have a bunch of people buying it and so on. Anyway, so it's this sort of constant interplay of supply and demand at different price points, determining my total quantity in that market. How much is supplied? How much is demanded? And sort of the holy grail for capitalists, for capitalist economists, is to reach this wonderful equilibrium price. Because their argument is that is the market at work. Those are market forces. That's people individually on their own without anyone else telling them to, deciding if they want to pay 3 or 10 or whatever dollars for a cup of lemonade or a barrel of gasoline or a brand new car or whatever it is. And then suppliers saying, here's how much we're willing to make at those prices. And so the argument is, doesn't always work perfectly, but the theoretical argument among economists is, in a market left to its own devices, what's so perfect about the market? Maybe not perfect, but what's so much better than any other economic system is, it is the market itself, individual choices, no government, no dictator, no, you know, bigger power sitting down and saying, this is how many cars we have to make this year. No 5-year plan like the Soviet Union always came up with. It's individual suppliers and individual demanders or consumers basically determining in a market the right number of ice cream cones to be made, or nurses to enter the workforce, or brain surgeons, or you name it, right? And so that is another way to think about what Adam Smith was saying is the invisible hand. The invisible hand guides the market and guides how many ice cream cones or cups of lemonade or new cars should be made, nurses or doctors, you name it. And it's the invisible hand, which is the market, not the government. It's a billion trial and error choices of you and me deciding to buy or not buy at different prices, suppliers deciding to supply or not at different prices, that eliminates shortages and surpluses. And so, to an economist, to capitalist economists who believe in this, they argue that it is the most efficient way to have the exact right number or amount of goods and services created based on our factors of production. We should chop down a tree in the forest and turn it into what? Pencils or desks. Let the market decide. Don't let government or any other group decide, but the market itself. Let a company take a risk, try pencils. If it doesn't sell any, the company will go bankrupt. A new company will come along. It'll chop down the next tree and make tables, and it'll sell those tables. And so it'll know to chop down another tree and make more tables, or whatever that is. But letting the market work eliminates shortages and surpluses, according to this argument, and is therefore the most efficient distribution of resources, factors of production, land, labor, and capital in an economy. And that's why so many economists, certainly not all of them, but so many economists really firmly believe in capitalism, allowing this market force to work to determine the allocation of resources in a society. So, to bring that down a little bit and a little bit simpler, yeah, we already should be able to, draw a demand curve, boy, a downward sloping line, supply curve, an upward sloping line. And then, of course, there's that magic point where they cross in this scenario, and that's called the equilibrium point. And so, what is the equilibrium point? Well, it's $4 and a quantity of 2. So I know in this scenario that suppliers, if they thought lemonade would be $4 a cup, they'd work hard enough to make 2 of those. And if lemonade was $4, 2 people would demand it at that price. So is anyone unhappy in this market? Well, sure. There's demanders who want $2 lemonade, right? Like 4 people would buy $2 lemonade in this scenario. Well, lemonade's not selling for 2, it's selling for 4. So they're unhappy. I wish Lamborghinis cost $3,000. I'd buy one. I'm an unhappy Lamborghini demander, but I won't go buy one for $80,000 or whatever they cost. Anyway, what about on the supply side? Well, sure, suppliers would love $8 lemonade. They'd go out and make 4 cups at $8, but they wouldn't sell them. If they priced it there, they would have one person, no people would buy lemonade, sorry, at $8. Here's my $8 line. At $8, 4 would be supplied, but none would be demanded. So they'd make 4 cups of lemonade, put an $8 price tag on it, have all those cups sitting on their table at the end of the day. No one would have purchased it. Well, what are they going to do? Lower the price to 6. See what happens. Lower the price to 4. Holy cow, we'll work hard enough at 4 to make 2 cups of lemonade. We sold both those cups. Perfect. At $4, 2 people are willing to demand it. Perfect. You have no wasted lemonade and no wasted demand for lemonade. I've eliminated shortages and surpluses. So shortages would appear down here. Let's say we had $2 lemonade. Supply would only be 1. So the suppliers would only be willing to make 1 cup of lemonade at $2, but 4 people would want to buy it. So this difference between supplied and four demanded, so that's considered a shortage of three. Three people want to buy that $2 lemonade, but only one cup was made. And so there's a shortage. And then conversely, if you're up above the equilibrium point, that is reflective of a surplus. I've made more lemonade than I've been able to sell. There are two more points on supply and demand, and then that'll conclude my notes. Sometimes government does set in and sets uh, mandates on prices for things. So one, it can set a price ceiling, a maximum price charged for goods, and it can set floors, a minimum price for goods and services. And interestingly, we'll go back and look at this on the graph too in a second, but price ceilings are actually below equilibrium, sort of counterintuitive. I think of ceilings as above me, right? But in this case, a ceiling is below equilibrium always, and a floor is above equilibrium always. Price ceilings can end up causing rationing or black market, and they cause shortages because I am, uh, the government is stepping in and setting a price um, below what suppliers would like to charge. And then a price floor will create surpluses because you're in effect creating artificially high prices. So who likes high prices? Well, suppliers do, right? If I'm making the lemonade, I want really high prices. Gas companies want $12 gallon gasoline as long as we'll all buy it. But demanders hate that. So anyway, price floors cause surpluses, price ceilings cause shortages. So I'll go back real fast and do this, and then we'll conclude. So here's my equilibrium again, right? $4.02. In this scenario, um, if government set in and said, hey, we're going to just make a law that says $2 is the most anyone can charge for lemonade. So that would be called a price ceiling, right? Because it's limiting the how high price of lemonade can go, put a cap on it or a ceiling on it. So there's $2 lemonade price ceiling. Well, suppliers hate that. They're only going to make one at $2, like we already discussed. Demanders love it. We'll buy four, except only one exists. So really what you've done there is you just created a shortage by setting a price ceiling below equilibrium. In that example, right, a shortage of 3 cups of lemonade or whatever. The exact opposite for a price floor. Price floor could be above equilibrium. Government could step in and say, you can't sell lemonade for anything less than $6. We want to protect our lemonade makers in this country. We're captives of the lemonade lobby, whatever. Anyway, so if government said you can't sell lemonade for less than 6, suppliers would love it and go out and make 3 cups of lemonade, but no one would demand $6 lemonade. So it would just sit there on the shelf and get thrown away because it's a surplus, greater supply than demand. Okay, so that is a little bit on price ceilings, price floors. Far more importantly, that gets a little complicated, and they don't exist very much in our economy. There is one price floor that people tend to really like, especially teenagers. That's called minimum wage. So the government has stepped in and said, you cannot sell your labor for $4 an hour. If an employer would demand your labor at $4 an hour, that would be illegal, right? And most of us really like minimum wage. Some don't, but anyway. So there's ceilings and floors. More importantly than that, just the overall sense of a supply and demand curve, where they meet at equilibrium. As long as we know that, we're pretty good. So thanks for sticking with me through Chapter 7 notes. Test soon.